When I first met my husband, one of the first things we bonded over was our love of the South. I grew up in Texas and he spent part of his childhood in Atlanta, Georgia. After we got married, we started our road trip in Dallas and went straight to New Orleans. One of the first things we had was Café du Monde beignets. The memory of those donuts and that coffee is so vivid to me that I came home and made a small batch in my kitchen just for us. Let me show you how to make them. I know you're gonna love them. Making beignet dough is actually quite simple. I frequently make this the night before. It really only has a few steps. We want to proof our yeast, make a buttermilk shortening dough, stir all of that together, and then add our flour, and that's it. Then it rests for at least an hour to 3 days. So the first thing we need to do is proof our yeast. The way you do this is you measure a half a teaspoon into a little dish, and then add 2 tablespoons of warm water on top. Your water needs to be between 105 and 110. If you just let the tap run for a little bit, it should feel slightly warm to the touch, but definitely not hot. That would kill your yeast. Add 2 tablespoons. And I want to add a little pinch of sugar just to get the yeast going. This is called proofing your yeast. Whenever you wake up your yeast in this way, you will see foamy bubbles on the surface. That's how you know it's alive and ready to go. If it doesn't do that, start over, because you don't want to spend all this time and then bake with dead yeast and have your dough not rise. Let it sit for about 5 minutes. Oh, I can already see it bubbling. So let's make the rest of our dough. The first thing we need is 2 teaspoons of shortening. Shortening is what gives these beignets lift and fluffiness and lightness. To this, add 1 tablespoon of sugar. We also need 1 egg white. Just the white. We're gonna save the yolk for another recipe, probably a cookie recipe. Just separate the egg by going back and forth, and eventually the white will fall off. And then 3 tablespoons of whole milk. You can also use buttermilk here, that's really great. This milk is room temperature. It's been sitting out for a little bit. 3 tablespoons. A little pinch of salt. And then I'm gonna start whisking this together. The last thing we need is 3 tablespoons of boiling water. The boiling water will help break up the shortening, but you wanna kind of break it up with your whisk as much as you can before adding the boiling water. Okay. The safest way to add boiling water is to pour it into another dish for measuring. And 3 tablespoons. It's okay if the dough looks a little curdled at this point. It will be fine when you add the flour and start to mix it together. Okay, whisk this together. Then we need to pour in our yeast, but I don't want to kill our yeast, so I'm going to temp this and make sure that it's less than 110 degrees. So we're going to add our blooming yeast. You can see the foam on the surface, the little bubbles that are coming up. I'm going to make sure you get all of it in there and stir this together. The extra sugar that you added to this will give the yeast something to eat and grow and rise and make your dough puff up. Finally, 1 1/4 cups of flour, and that's it for your dough. You just want to stir this together and then give it about an hour to proof and rise. You can do this in an oven set to proof. You can do it on the counter if your house is kind of warm. You can also make it the night before and just let it slow rise overnight in the fridge. I like to do that because then you wake up to fresh beignet dough and all you have to do is fry them. Pretty easy to work with dough. It's a little sticky at this point. Cover this and let it rise. I actually have some dough that's already risen. This is our dough. It has doubled in bulk and it's time to roll it out. Just gonna flour my counter lightly. Gather all the dough. It's a little bit sticky. This dough has a lot of air bubbles in it, which is what makes them puff in the hot oil. A little flour on top. We're only making 6 or 8 beignets. Kind of depends how long your dough has risen. I'm gonna roll it out into a rectangle shape. Oh, it's nice and soft and easy to work with. Just roll it gently. It's about 8 inches by 4 inches. Use a pizza cutter to cut it in half, in the middle. Then you can let's get 6 out of this one. 1, 2, no, let's get 8. There we go. These are our little beignets. I'm gonna take these to the back burner and heat up some oil and fry them. I have here a 1.5 quart saucepan. I clipped a candy thermometer to the side, and we're gonna add 2 cups of a neutral oil, something like canola, peanut, something like that would work. We're gonna turn the heat to medium-high and let it come up to 360 degrees before we start dropping our beignets in. Our oil has reached 360, so it's time to add our dough. Let's add 1 or 2 at a time. Don't overcrowd your pan. I like to put them on a little strainer so I have more control when I add them. They're gonna fry on the first side for 3 minutes, then check them and flip when they're golden brown. You can watch them puff in the pot. That's that little air bubble forming in the center of the beignet. Keep an eye on your heat so you can adjust it. You don't want it going too much above 380. It's gonna drop a little bit when you add the dough and then it'll rise back up. I turned mine down to about medium and it's maintaining about 360. So the first side is golden brown, so I'm gonna gently flip them over and fry them on the second side. They'll take less time on the second side, about 2 minutes. When they're golden brown, you wanna remove them from the oil and let them sit on a wire rack to cool slightly. And now it's time to dunk them in powdered sugar. They're ready. Now it's time for the best part. It's time to dust them in powdered sugar. I'm gonna put half in the bottom of this pie plate. Move them in. Go big or go home when it comes to beignets. It's time to taste. It's a messy job, but they're so good. These are so light and fluffy. They taste just like the ones in New Orleans. For the full recipe, visit dessertfor2.com.